In the years leading up to the Great War, the United States military found themselves in somewhat of a dire straits in regards to the war effort with the Communist Chinese. The Resource Wars, as it was known, had shown the United States that they were not the military powerhouse they had believed they were. This harsh reality had become abundantly clear during the winter of 2066. The Chinese, under extreme desperation for oil and other resources, threw their entire military might at the neighboring Western superpower. The goal was to capture the American-controlled Alaskan oil pipeline. This operation was carried out by using both sea and air maneuvers. Chinese nuclear submarines would blockade the Bering Strait, while Chinese airships would launch deep into the state of Alaska. Using superior stealth technology, the Chinese deployed swaths of paratroopers from the sky. These soldiers, starving and driven onward by their commissar's sword, the fear of their loved ones being butchered, and the sheer love of communism ideology, were able to not only capture the pipeline, but also capture the city of Anchorage. American forces were unable to counter the Chinese. The sudden and swift arrival of an overwhelming force was too much. In one fateful winter, Anchorage had fallen and Alaska was gone. This defeat shocked the United States military and forced the top brass to accept that if America was to reclaim their land and property, they would need outside assistance in devising more serious counter-military technology. The Department of Defense would thus begin a bidding war with the numerous megacorporations of the country. This would include companies such as Robco International, General Atomics, and Big Mountain. Hell, even soft drink companies such as the beloved Nuka-Cola obtained a military contract deal. But the most profound of them all was the Faustian deal struck with scientific conglomerate West-Tek Industries. This military contract with the tech giant would have the most resounding impact on not only the war effort, but the future of the country and the world. The first task requested of the company was to solve the riddle of battlefield superiority. The United States Army mechanized units had failed to properly maneuver within the deep snow of the Alaskan tundra. This was detrimental to securing control of the battlefield, as it forced Army personnel to try and win a trench conflict with the Chinese. Their boys needed heavy gun and artillery support if they were to minimize the sheer volume of Chinese infantry. Well, whatever the Army was considering as options for West-Tek, the engineers in the lab came up with the best possible solution that the military never asked for. The Power Combat Infantry Suit, Model T-45. West-Tek figured that if the Army could not move tanks through the snow but could move men, then the obvious answer to the dilemma was to turn a man into a tank. This would soon become the greatest military engineering achievement in the nation's history, as the T-45 power armor suit quickly was moved to the war front and proceeded to be the singular warhorse for American victory. The suit changed the dynamics of infantry squad maneuvers and fire team tactics, allowing for several men to lead entire platoons deep into Chinese-occupied territory. Weighing nearly 1.5 tons in tank, grade steel and radiation-proof led upon a servo-supported frame, and powered by microfusion core power batteries, the soldiers donning T-45 power armor were able to carry heavy weapons once only seen fixed to troop-transporting vehicles and vertibird aircrafts. Wielding M134 miniguns, M40 automatic grenade launchers, and 50 caliber machine guns. These soldiers were now nearly indestructible, bringers of death. They had enhanced stamina, strength, and could carry several times the suit's weight and carry load, effectively achieving the Army's wish to gain battlefield superiority. The counterattack, named the Reclamation of Anchorage, saw the Sino-American War swell to catastrophic carnage. American infantry, now led by the power armor-bolstered platoons, made short work of the Chinese insurgents holding the western front of their newly acquired pipeline territory. 5.56 shells littered the snow, as both Chinese and American troops perished in the freezing Alaskan conditions. Though the T-45D power armor allowed for soldiers to prolong their battlefield mortality rate, what the military did not account for was the sheer toll it would take on the pilots' mind. China would not back down and continue to hurl their relentless waves of troops at the thundering barrels of the men in steel. A person can only handle so much carnage before the shreds of humanity begin to shear away. But there wasn't time for Pinko Tea Party patty cake business. There was a war to win. So, the T-45D power armor went through the ringer, and eventually West-Tek improved upon their formula. Soon, the T-51 Model B power armor rolled out into the war front, and eventually the T-60 Model F. While the T-51 Model B saw the most use and modifications, each and all variants were deemed a complete success. This earned West-Tek a high level of respect amongst the United States military. If these scientists could solve the problems of the war, then what else could they do? More and more government funds found their way to West-Tek. And from this funding came the request to solve the second issue the top brass and suits of America needed solved. Though this issue was more of a biochemical threat. Outside of the Chinese land invasion of Alaska, the arrival of the new plague during the decade of the 2050s struck fear into the hearts of both the American people and the government. Known also as the Blue Flu and Limit 115, the new plague was a severely virulent infectious disease. It would eventually lead to a national quarantine in the year of 2053. Though the specific epidemiology of the new plague is unknown, what it did prove was that America was as unprepared for biochemical threats as it was for physical ones. Though, as we have seen throughout history, creating instruments of war for the purpose of death and destruction appears to be far easier than creating technology for the repairing and healing of those suffering. But that adage is not applicable in this scenario, because the cold truth is that anything is possible if money and means are at your disposal, and the demand for it is high enough. Once funding was approved, West-Tek not only got to work on this project, but appeared to make great strides in biological research in their research facility in California. It is here, in the year of 2076, that two remnants of the early Sino-American War would meet on a trajectory that would have both catastrophic and beneficent outcomes for the people of the present and future America. In the year of 2076, the Neurobiological and Chemical Division of West-Tek had made great strides in their research titled the Pan-Immunity Virion Project. The Pan-Immunity Virion was to be their answer to new plague and any other biological threat to the American people. A pharmaceutical panacea which would grant total immunity to any disease. The last phase of the project was ready to commence, that of human subject testing. The Department of Defense, upon reviewing the most recent results from the Pan-Immunity Project research, was eager to do whatever was needed to allow West-Tek scientists to continue their work on the project. America had at this point completely turned the tide of war in their favor since the reclaiming of both Anchorage and the oil pipeline. But resource use was spiraling out of control. And if the U.S. armed forces were feeling the brunt of this exhaustion, the Chinese would have to be in a more severe circumstance. American politicians feared the worst from their enemy, and so there was no longer any time to consider old world ideas deemed petty, altruistic, or time-constraining. West-Tek was thus given the green light to do whatever necessary to complete their research with nothing less than utter success to report back. Dr. Robert Anderson, the chief scientist leading the Pan-Immunity Virion Project. was told to get the job done with full support of the United States government. Not only would their research team receive state-of-the-art facilities, but that they should also be expecting one of the most elite units of U.S. Army soldiers fresh from the front of the war to act as their own personal security force. The government was aware of the Chinese and their stealth technology, and threat of communist espionage activities were at its peak amongst both civilian and government circles. The Department of Defense could not risk this research getting into the hands of the communist Chinese, so the order was given. And so, Dr. Robert Anderson and his team of scientists would soon be joined by Colonel Robert Spindle and his team of elite power armor-clad super soldiers out in the sunny state of California.